Mr. Peterson watered his petunias. The sun warmed his face. Across the street, Mr. Smith's house stood silent. Mr. Smith always tended his garden on Saturdays. Days passed. Mr. Smith didn't collect his mail, didn't mow his lawn. Mr. Peterson saw no movement, no lights. Mr. Peterson frowned, watering his roses. He hadn't seen Mr. Smith in weeks. The silence was unsettling. Something wasn't right. Mr. Peterson tried to remember the last time he'd spoken to Mr. Smith. It had been a while. They weren't close, but they exchanged pleasantries. He thought about calling the police. Reporting a missing person seemed dramatic. What if Mr. Smith was simply on vacation? Days turned into a week. The silence from Mr. Smith's house became unbearable. Mr. Peterson couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He decided to investigate. Mr. Peterson crossed the street. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach. He peered through a window. Dust covered the furniture. He tried the doorknob. It turned. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The air felt stale and cold. He called out, "Hello, Mr. Smith?" Silence. He walked further into the house, each step echoing in the quiet. And then he saw him. In the dim light of the living room, a figure sat slumped in an armchair. Mr. Peterson's heart pounded in his chest. He took a hesitant step closer, his hand outstretched. "Mr. Smith!" he called out again, his voice trembling. The figure didn't move. Mr. Peterson reached out and touched the figure's shoulder. It was cold, unyielding. He flicked on the light switch. The man in the chair looked exactly like him. Mr. Peterson stumbled back, a gasp escaping his lips. It was like looking into a mirror, except it wasn't a reflection. It was another him, an exact replica, sitting dead in Mr. Smith's chair. Panic seized Mr. Peterson. He had to get out of there. He turned to run, but his feet felt like lead. He couldn't move. He was frozen in place, his eyes fixed on his lifeless doppelganger. He thought about calling the police, but what would he say? That he found his own dead body in his neighbor's house? No, he had to find out what was going on, even if it killed him. Mr. Peterson forced himself to move closer. He studied the face of his double. It was him, down to the last detail. The same wrinkles around the eyes, the same mole on his chin. He reached out and touched the cold, lifeless skin. It felt real, too real. He noticed a small, leather-bound notebook on the table beside the chair. He picked it up, his hands shaking. Maybe it held answers. He opened the notebook. The pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams he didn't recognize. He flipped through them, his heart sinking. It was gibberish. Then he noticed something, a name, scribbled in the corner of one of the pages. His name. Below his name, a single sentence. The convergence is complete. He didn't understand. What did it mean? He had to get out of there. He had to find someone who could explain this. He slammed the book shut and ran out of the house. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs ached. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of his own home. He locked the door, gasping for breath. He had to call someone. The police? The FBI? He didn't know who to trust. He glanced at the mirror hanging in the hallway. He looked the same, but something was different. He felt different, changed. His reflection blinked. Mr. Peterson stumbled back from the mirror, fear gripping his heart. His reflection continued to stare at him, a sinister smile spreading across its face. "What's wrong?" the reflection asked, its voice a chilling mimicry of his own. "Don't you recognize yourself?" Mr. Peterson watched in horror as the reflection reached out from the mirror, its hand passing through the glass as if it were water. "It's time for you to go," the reflection said, its grip tightening on Mr. Peterson's arm. "The convergence is complete, and there can only be one." Mr. Peterson screamed, a primal sound of fear and despair, as he was pulled into the mirror, his own reflection leering back at him from the other side. The house remained silent.